Raider Nation, it's Mitchell Renz here, host of the Raiders Report, and today's show is presented by Manscaped. On today's episode, I'm going to tell you the one Raiders player that I think is the most likely to get traded this offseason. To make sure that your significant other doesn't trade you, make sure your balls are looking great. Go to manscaped.com, code Raiders for 20% off and free shipping on the best male grooming products out there. So this show is built on the idea that there is a certain Raiders player that I believe has the highest chance to get traded this offseason. Maybe it's before the NFL draft. Maybe it's right after the draft. Maybe it's right before 53-man cut-down day. And some of y'all are probably thinking, well, Mitch, which player is it? I'm going to tell you who it is, but always remember, if a trade ends up going down here on this show, we're going to keep you up to date. And if this player in particular gets traded, I will be going live, so make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you got those notifications turned on. And I always think, like, why would a certain player end up getting dealt? There's multiple reasons. To me, there's four big reasons right now. To me, the first one is he could be think of it as a cherry on top. The Raiders, the Vikings, all these NFL teams that are being rumored to want to trade up for a quarterback, could you potentially put together a whole bunch of picks and then you add a player into the mix for the cherry on top? What if we knew that he might not be able to make the 53-man roster? Last year, I stepped up here on this show and I said that Neil Farrell Jr. might not make the squad. Matthew Butler might not make this squad based off things that we were told before the draft. And what happened? Neil Farrell Jr. ended up getting dealt. What about this one? Teams potentially interested, because some of you are going to be like, well, Mitch, how does a guy who might not make the 53-man roster, how are NFL teams going to be interested? It's based on the player themselves, based on the new regime, and based on where they went to college. And on top of that final reason is it's not a fit with this regime. Like, when you think about players that could potentially be dealt, a lot of times they're drafted by a former regime. And this is a player that was drafted by a former regime, which is really nothing new to the Raiders fans that watch this show a lot because we've had so many different head coaches. These are all the reasons for a trade. So before I reveal which player I believe is the most likely to get traded this offseason, here's going to be your opportunity to let me know. This is going to be the pinned comment on today's show. You are about to get hit with a YouTube ad break, so while that ad is playing, I want you to scroll on down and let me know which Raider is the most likely to be traded this offseason after this YouTube ad break. My answer. The player that is the most likely to get traded for the Las Vegas Raiders is Byron Young, defensive tackle for the Silver and Black. The reason why that I believe that Byron Young is the most likely to get dealt, I have 5 reasons coming up here on today's show. And there's a multitude of reasons why the Alabama product could potentially be getting dealt. But if you follow along with a lot of the moves that the Raiders have already made, you can kind of see that this one is, the writing is on the wall. First reason here of why I believe Byron Young could end up getting dealt. Drafted by the previous regime. Anytime you have a player that's drafted by the previous regime, the new regime that comes in, Antonio Pierce, Tom Telesco, they're not committed to anybody. And, you know, people thought it was crazy when I even said, like, hey, you could see Alex Leatherwood not making the squad the year after he was drafted at pick 17. New regimes don't give a shit. And with Byron Young, even though he was selected in round 3, pick 74 overall in the 2023 NFL draft, AP and Telesco, they could bring in their own guys. Hell, they've already brought in their own guys. And if you decide to move on from Byron and you trade him, yeah, you're going to eat $780K. And yeah, sure, you're going to save $482, but like, saving this little bit of money, it's more important about the roster spot and taking advantage of the value, because right now, Byron Young's value might be the highest than it's ever going to be, just because he might not see the field. The next reason here is the cherry on top for a trade-up. I know that the Raiders want Jayden Daniels. You know that the Raiders want Jayden Daniels. We all know that they are looking at least for a quarterback, and if there is a realm of possibility that come draft night, the Raiders are trying to trade up and you want to try to have that extra cherry on top, could you put in Byron Young for a deal? Or the trade back up into the first round discussion, because I told y'all last Thursday that the Raiders tried to make a deal with the Miami Dolphins, sending 44, 77, and pick 112 to the Miami Dolphins for pick 21. The Dolphins said no. What happens if there's a team that's kind of in that situation and the Raiders go, we'll give you all this, but we'll also give you Byron Young, which some people might think, like, who wants Byron? He was a third-round pick last year. There were multiple NFL teams that probably had a third-round grade on him and believe, you know what? New regime, new fit. We could still be able to use him and take advantage of that for the cheap because he'd probably go for a fifth, maybe a sixth-round pick. Coming up next here on the show, I got some more reasons of why I believe Byron Young is the most likely to get traded this offseason. But before I do want to tell you about our awesome sponsor here, Manscaped. And I've talked a lot of amazing things about Manscaped over the years. Not only do I think they have the best male grooming products out there, not only would Alex put her stamp of approval on Manscaped products, but they're also doing something very special for the month of April, and I want you all to listen up right now. Did you know 1 man every hour, every day, is diagnosed with testicular cancer? In fact, testicular cancer is the most common form of cancer among men aged 15 to 35. With April being National Testicular Cancer Awareness Month, our friends over at Manscaped have partnered with the Testicular Cancer Society to help spread awareness for men's health and early cancer detection. Visit manscaped.com/TCS to learn how to check yourself for early signs of cancer. And as always, you can use promo code Raiders for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. In addition to providing the right tools and solutions for comfortable and easy grooming, Manscaped is committed to raising awareness and giving support for fighters, survivors, and families impacted by testicular cancer. That is why they will be donating $50,000 to the Testicular Cancer Society. Help save lives and your balls by going over to manscaped.com/TCS and sharing their funny, educational check yourself video. While you're at it, grab 20% off and free shipping with code Raiders because, like a famous American philosopher once said, take care of your chicken, your balls, and your mentals. Now, I use Manscaped products a lot. I also have had a lot of people impacted by cancer in their days, and to me, if I can kill two birds with one stone here, my hairy balls and testicular cancer, I'm going to try to do it. So shout out to Manscaped. That link's going to be available to all of y'all down in the comments and down in the description of today's show. Manscaped's doing a lot, and I want y'all to be able to help out your balls too. Let's go to the next one. Byron might not make the 53-man roster, and I do think because the Raiders know with their current roster and the current depth at the defensive tackle position, if you know right now, like if AP and Telsco deep down know, like, shit, there is a chance that Young might not make this team, I'm trying to trade him for literally anything. Like, if I can get a 7th-round pick in next year's draft, I'm going to try to do it because this is a player who played in only 6 games last season, made only 4 tackles, and was a healthy scratch for most of the season. On top of that, look at what happened when Antonio Pierce took over. Other players got more opportunities, and Byron was kind of the odd man left out. And when you look at how many defensive tackles that this roster has, and if the Raiders decide to keep only 6, like, you know this, Christian Wilkins going to make the team. Depending on how they want to put Tyree Wilson, he's going to make the team. Adam Butler, going to make the team. John Jenkins, going to make the team. Sure, there's some other players here and there that he's going to have to battle out a roster spot for, but I've already just said there's at least 4 defensive tackles that are guaranteed to make this squad. Now, the next thing is, look at what the Raiders have done. Like, NFL coaches can say one thing. NFL GMs can say one thing. But actions speak louder than words. And if there is one thing that the Raiders told me this offseason was they were not confident at all in the defensive tackles this offseason. Because not only did you add the biggest defensive tackle in free agency outside of Chris Jones to a monstrous 4-year, $110 million deal, which they did by Aidan Wilkins, you also decided to bring back John Jenkins. You decided to bring back Adam Butler. They looked at Byron Young, Jerry Tillery, Marquand McCall, Matthew Butler, and Nesta Jade Silvera, and they said, holy shit, this is one of the worst defensive tackle rooms in the league, and we had to decide to make some moves here to make sure that our room was a little bit more secure. And no disrespect to Byron, he's not beating out Adam Butler. Like, this was a regime that had Rob Leonard that decided, you know what, I want to bring back Butler, Jenkins, Wilkins, put all these guys together from their time back at Miami because Jenkins, even though he's up there in age at 34 years old, he's coming off a really solid year for this team, and he's going to be a good depth player. So, like, right now, even if Tyree Wilson is also in that defensive tackle rotation, which he's going to be in that discussion, at best, You have a guy that was picked in the 3rd round. You're hoping that he's the 5th defensive tackle on your roster. And then the other part of the actions speak louder than words argument goes into future/reserve contracts. Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco. Maybe not Telesco because he wasn't hired yet. But Antonio Pierce and this Raiders regime, on January 8th, they decided to give out 15 reserve contracts. 2 of those players being, one, Nesta Jade Silvera, who played his college football at Arizona State. Call me crazy. If Antonio Pierce is going to pick between Nesta Jade Silvera and Byron Young, I am going to guess that he's going to go with somebody that he has connections with and Nesta Jade Silvera, which then brings us to our next guy, Marquand McCall, who also got a contract extension, a 1-year deal essentially. But he's a totally different kind of defensive tackle than somebody like Byron. Marquand is 6'3", 380 pounds, a monstrous human being that showed, okay, he could take on double teams. What if the only job that they would want McCall for is 4th and 1 down at the goal line, or to just put in an extra body to be able to have somebody at the practice squad? Because I'll say this, one of the risks that the Raiders would run into is if you have Marquand McCall and Byron Young both on your practice squad, I think the higher chance of a probability of getting taken is, in fact, Byron. So because of that, do you just decide to try to move on from Byron Young and just get whatever you can now? But let's just say this. If you had to pick one to get rid of, who would you get rid of? Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, that 3 out of these 4 are going to make the 53 and going to make your practice squad this upcoming season. If you got to get rid of one of them, are you getting rid of Byron, Matthew Butler, Nesta Jade Silvera, or Marquand McCall? Let me know down below, who would you end up moving on from? For me personally, the name that if I got to pick from all 4 of those guys, I'm going to move on from Marquand McCall. And I just don't think that he's the most talented out of the other 3. Byron did an okay job based on players that I talked to in May, June, July last year. Then he had an injury and really struggled to kind of get it going again. But what I do think is the most likely and the best thing to build the best team possible for the Raiders is you trade Byron Young right now. You try to get a 6th or a 7th round pick for him. You then use one of those 6th or 7th round picks to hopefully maybe help you trade back up even earlier in the NFL draft, or stockpile a draft pick in case you do have to use some extra draft capital to go up and get your quarterback. But then on top of that, if I got to pick in that nutshell of those 4 players, I think only 2 out of those 4 even still make the roster. So I think it's going to be Nesta Jade Silvera. I think it's going to be Matthew Butler. So that means Marquand McCall, Byron Young are on the outside looking in. That is why I believe Byron Young is the most likely to be traded this offseason. So we're going to go through these one more time. If you want to take a screenshot of this, remember, you can post it on Twitter. You can post it on Instagram at Mitchell Renz 365. I'm not sitting up here saying that he is going to get traded. I'm simply telling you that if somebody were to ask me, out of all the Raiders players this offseason, who do you believe is the most likely to get dealt? His name is Byron Young, based off of these reasons. Drafted by the previous regime. I think that we know the Raiders are trying to trade up, and he could be the cherry on top. I'm not sure if he makes the 53-man roster because the Raiders have added Christian Wilkins, Adam Butler, John Jenkins to the mix. On top of that, you might decide to put Tyree Wilson at defensive tackle. You also have future contracts for Nesta Jade Silvera. You have a future contract for a dude in Marquand McCall. You chose to play Matthew Butler over Byron Young last season with this current regime. All of those reasons are why I believe Byron Young is not going to be a member of the Raiders this upcoming season.